Today I'm going to give you guys a nuts and bolts tutorial on astral projection. What is astral projection exactly? Well, it's basically a more active, reliable, and controllable version of lucid dreaming. In fact, it really is lucid dreaming, just consciously entered from a state of being semi-awake. In a typical lucid dream, you wake up already in the dream, whereas in astral projection, you consciously witness the transition into the dream state. And this creates the perception of an astral body or dream body, which detaches from the physical body and steps out into the dream world, or the dream space as I like to call it. One of the main benefits of practicing astral projection over lucid dreaming proper is that you can decide exactly when you want to do it. You simply make sure you've set up the right conditions, and then plan on a night or morning to project. Now, the method that I use takes most people about 1 to 3 days of attempts to get down, and after a little bit of practice, can become an extremely reliable way to explore the vastness of the psychic realm. Okay, so the method I use, which is an adaptation of Michael Raduga's from his book The Phase, consists of 10 basic steps. Now, I'm going to lay those 10 steps out for you first, and then dig into some background that's necessary for understanding how to actually perform them. And just one caveat before I lay out the steps. If you're planning to follow this method, optimum results will be achieved through following the instructions exactly. Improvising, altering, and cutting corners will most likely lead to poor results and frustration. Additionally, I should note that this quick guide is one of several aware dreaming strategies I use, namely the one I refer to as the post-rest entry strategy. This is the easiest, quickest, and most effective method for most people. Performed upon awakening from nearly a full night's sleep, it utilizes the body-mind's close proximity to dream consciousness to effect a swift separation from the physical body. A full text version of this video can be found at levelsobt.com/quick-guide. So don't worry if you're having trouble keeping all this stuff in your head. It's admittedly rather a lot. Okay, here's the procedure. Step 1. Go to bed at your normal time and set your alarm to wake you up 6 hours later. Before going to bed, devise a mental plan of action for your projection. This includes deciding which separation techniques will be used and what you'll do once in the dream space. Step 2. Upon awakening from your alarm, get up, and we're talking get up with your physical body still. Get a drink of water and go to the bathroom. If needed, review the 10 steps of the procedure. Step 3. After about 5 to 20 minutes, go back to sleep with the strong intention of projecting the next time you awaken, naturally, without an alarm. Assure yourself that you won't move your physical body or open your physical eyes upon awakening. Step 4. The next time you wake up, don't move your physical body or open your physical eyes. Instead, immediately attempt a primary separation technique. Getting up, climbing out, rolling out, levitation. All these I'll detail in a second. If this doesn't work, move on to secondary techniques. Phantom wiggling, hand rubbing, visualization. Again, I'll talk about those in a sec. Choose 2 to 3 secondary techniques and cycle through them, performing each for 3 to 5 seconds. Perform no less than 4 complete cycles. If separation doesn't occur after roughly a minute, discontinue the attempt and fall back asleep with the intention of repeating all these activities the next time you awaken. Over the next few hours, up to 4, you should awaken more frequently than usual due to the intention to project you've established within your body and mind. Go through the entire process, meaning primary attempt followed by cycling of secondary techniques, upon each awakening until separation occurs. This amounts to roughly 5 to 10 repetitions of the entire process, or up to 10 minutes of actual separation attempts. Step 5. Once you've separated from your physical body and have entered the dream space, you must first solidify lucidity. Do this by aggressively grabbing onto your surroundings and rubbing your hands together. We're talking dream body now. At first, vision may be absent or impaired. The more lucidity is solidified through physical contact with the dream space, the clearer dream vision will become. If vision does not arise, there are other techniques to address this, which I'll discuss later. Step 6. Try not to lose yourself to bewilderment. Instead, Collect your focus and remember your plan of action. For first-timers, this should be finding a mirror in the dream space to see your reflection in, and accomplishing at least one other item. Maintaining focus and a sense of directed action will ensure that the experience won't fade back into an ordinary dream. Step 7. Do not look directly at objects or scenery in the dream space. Instead, look through and around them. This will clarify the images to an extraordinary degree, to the extent that they may appear clearer and sharper than the objects in the physical world. Similarly, do not look too long in the same direction. Doing so weakens lucidity, causing objects to morph or dissolve, and can lead to an early termination of the entire experience. You must constantly shift your gaze and maintain a determined, almost frenzied effort to keep moving at all times. Step 8. Maintain physical contact with the dream environment at all times. Doing so extends the duration of the experience. Failing to do so will either cause the experience to dissolve or you to drift back into a non-lucid dream. Step 9. Most projections end with a dissolution of the experience, or what I call dissipation. The dream space fades away and normal waking consciousness returns. You may feel your dream body sliding back into your physical body, or some similar sensation. Upon awakening, immediately review your experience either by writing it down, speaking it into a recording device, or simply thinking about it. Failing to do this or waiting a long time can cause the degree of recall to rapidly diminish, often to the point of forgetting that you had the experience at all. Step 10. Do not practice astral projection more than 2 to 3 times per week. It's highly preferable to practice when there's nothing pressing in your schedule the next day, as you may feel somewhat drowsy after a morning of projection attempts. Practicing the morning of a busy day can cause anxiety, minimizing the chances for successful projection and possibly leading to frustration. Primary techniques. If your timing is right, meaning if you've woken deeply in the phase, it's often possible to quickly and directly enter the dream space immediately upon awakening. This is done using primary techniques. These are techniques which, using a single coordinated motion, effect a swift separation of the entire dream body from the physical body. Primary techniques should always be attempted before anything else, even if the phase doesn't seem quite strong enough. They are by far the quickest and easiest entry point into the dream space, so to forgo an attempt at using them can cause you more work than may be necessary. The most crucial thing to remember, and perhaps the most difficult thing to initially comprehend, is that this separation from the physical body is not an imagined action. Rather, it'll feel like a physical event, like there is a real body getting up from your bed and walking, floating, flying, swimming, etc. out. However, it must begin with an intention. You must imagine what it will be like in order to will the action into actually occurring. This is where many people run into trouble. Thinking that they have to simply imagine separating from their body, they fail to make the transition to literally feeling it. Separation of the dream body from the physical body is a matter of transferring one's sensory perceptual apparatus from one body to the next. It can be difficult to recognize that separation has occurred due to the extremely physical quality of the experience. When first experimenting, many people mistakenly think that they have moved their physical body instead of the dream body. There are a number of clues to help you determine whether or not you've successfully separated. First off, if you have to even ask yourself whether or not you're in your physical body, chances are you've separated. Unless you're prone to dissociation in your waking life, and some people are, it's probably not often that you have to seriously ponder whether or not you're dreaming. Other clues include, but aren't limited to, a strong feeling of vibration throughout the body, finding that you're flying, floating, or hovering, altered vision or no vision, for example, finding that it's much darker than usual in your room, anomalous visual perceptions of any kind, such as strange images or objects which aren't normally there, anomalous sounds or physical sensations, and anomalous occurrences of any kind, such as flipping the light switch and having nothing happen. There are 4 main primary techniques, and there certainly are others. These are just the most obvious and effective. The first is getting up. Simply sit up and walk out of your physical body. This sounds far-fetched, but it's something that every human being is capable of. When you do it for the first time, you may even get an odd sense of déjà vu, meaning you've probably done this before sometime in your life and not remembered it. It must be done very swiftly and with rock-solid confidence. The second primary technique is climbing out. This is essentially the same as getting up, but it's a bit more labor-intensive. Instead of sitting up and walking out, you're essentially pushing your dream body out, typically by pressing your dream hands against the bed and forcing yourself upward. Sometimes it may seem like there are invisible objects around you which you can grab hold of and use as surfaces to push against or pull on. The third primary technique is rolling out. With this technique, the idea is to roll your dream body to the left or right along your body's vertical, meaning head to toe, axis. This must be done incredibly forcefully, but making sure not to move the physical body. The technique sometimes requires priming. In other words, it may take a few back and forth rolling or rocking motions to fully propel you out of your physical body and into the dream space. However, it's highly preferable to shoot for separating in one fluid motion, as every second that passes diminishes the chances of success. The fourth primary technique is levitation. Levitation is somewhat different from the other techniques, in that it's less overtly physical. Rather than forcing your way out of your physical body through physical exertion, you must imagine that you're levitating or hovering above your bed. It may seem less attainable than the other three, but it's actually quite easy and natural, as most people will instantly recognize the sensation from previous dream experiences. As with the other techniques, once you imagine the action and project a strong intention to carry it out, you must then transition to feeling it or it won't happen. Once in the air, simply float, fly, or walk into the dream space. Secondary techniques. Secondary techniques are performed if and when a primary technique fails. They are essentially maneuvers to engage the dream body, or in other words, to trigger awareness and physical control over it. In this regard, they are a sort of warm-up mechanism. Typically, a primary technique will be required after this warm-up, although this is not always the case. You may find yourself fully in the dream space after performing secondary techniques. The number of potentially useful secondary techniques out there is rather large. Literally, anything that helps a person gain active control over their dream body qualifies. Here's a list of some of the most obvious and effective ones. Number 1. The rope. This is probably the most commonly discussed and attempted of all the secondary techniques. It's so popular that many tutorials present it alone as the method for astral projection. You are to imagine that there is a rope hanging right over your body. You then grab hold of this rope and pull yourself out. Again, it begins in the imagination and transitions to a physical sensation. Usually, once out of your body, an additional step is needed to detach from the rope and proceed into the dream space. This can be done simply by hopping off, as you would a regular rope. However, it may seem that climbing the rope has simply brought you to the point where your dream body is just barely separated from the physical. In this case, reverting to a primary technique should do the trick. Another secondary technique is phantom wiggling. This is the one I personally use most often when primary techniques fail. It entails moving or wiggling a chosen body part back and forth, meaning up to down, side to side, etc., or in a rotational manner until this part of the dream body becomes fully dislodged from the physical. Typically done with the hands, feet, arms, or legs, it requires a very forceful, repetitive motion. Again, you must make sure not to move the physical body by accident. Most people will intuitively know when they've engaged their dream limbs instead of their physical limbs. Under the heavy vibrations of the phase, the physical body is difficult to move in the first place. Once phantom wiggling has cued awareness of the dream body, you may use a primary technique to fully separate, if of course you don't find yourself already in the dream space. Another secondary technique is swimming. According to Michael Raduga, the swimmer technique is the most effective secondary technique for students attending his workshops. I've included it third here because it can sometimes leave the beginner in a difficult situation, namely that you begin your projection in a body of water or liquid. While treading dream water is certainly a legitimate projection experience, it can easily become the entirety of the experience. And what I mean by this is that it can be difficult for the novice to know how to get out of the water. In any case, it's a technique that many people try and like, if for nothing else than the sheer fact that it provides entry into the dream space. Simply engage your dream body in a forceful swimming motion, with both arms and legs, or arms alone, to utilize this technique. If you get lucky, this swimming motion, instead of dropping you off in some faraway ocean, will be just enough to cause the dream body to detach. In this case, then use a primary technique to separate fully. Another secondary technique is visualization. Compared to the techniques I've just described, this technique reverses the order in which the senses arise in the dream body. With the rope, phantom wiggling, and swimming, the tactile kinesthetic sense is the first to manifest, usually followed by vision. With the visualization technique, it is observing images which causes the dream space to materialize. Simply imagine some predetermined object in front of you. It could be anything. However, it should be no more than a foot away from you. If it or something else appears, use a primary technique to separate, if of course visualization alone hasn't already propelled you directly into the dream space. A more passive variation of this technique, which may be more appropriately termed peering, involves staring into the blackness behind your closed eyelids with the anticipation that something unspecified will appear. This is essentially a kind of scanning of the environment with just enough focus to recognize anything out of the ordinary. In either variation of the visualization technique, once something appears, it's crucial that you do not examine the details of the object or scene too closely. Doing so will cause it, and consequently the phase, to dissolve. Instead, look through or past it. Still another secondary technique is hand rubbing. Hand rubbing is an important technique for several reasons. For one, it combines visualization with tactile kinesthetic perception, and so usually causes vision and touch to arise spontaneously. Secondly, it factors heavily into the critical technique of solidifying lucidity once in the dream space, which we'll discuss later. What you do is visualize your hands, your dream hands of course, in front of you, no more than a foot away from your face. Rub them together while you do this. You should see and feel them fading in simultaneously. Once enacted, use a primary technique to separate. Yet another secondary technique still is listening. This is probably the most passive and open-ended secondary technique, in that it usually involves simply paying attention and waiting for something to happen. If you hear anything out of the ordinary, latch onto it and follow it. It could be an ambient hum, a group of people chatting, or an alien symphony from hyperspace. Whatever it is, focusing on it will cause the dream space to materialize, either placing you squarely in it, or to the extent that a primary technique will now be viable. The musically inclined may find a more active application of the technique useful. This consists of imagining music that you already know. You may be extremely surprised to hear a song playing in your mind's ear, as if you were tuning into a radio broadcast. This song may be reproduced in exact detail or be altered in some way. Sometimes the music heard may be entirely different than what you intended. In any case, it'll seem like you're literally hearing the music, not merely imagining it. Background techniques. There are several techniques which can be considered secondary, but which are better placed in a separate category, what I call background techniques. Background techniques are those which, when performed simultaneously with secondary techniques, have an intensifying effect which increases one's chances for successful separation. The techniques themselves are Raduga's, although he doesn't categorize them in this way. The first technique is straining the brain. This technique is somewhat difficult to describe, as it only really makes sense while in the phase. Essentially, it's a kind of intense concentration on nothing in particular, accompanied by a physical sensation of spasmodic pulsation in the head, almost as if the brain were being squeezed as a muscle. Doing this results in increased vibrations in the dream body, and often causes noises to occur, most typically a high-pitched tone or buzzing sound. It can be performed in conjunction with any secondary technique or used on its own. The second background technique is straining the body. It's the same concept as straining the brain, but with the dream body. It may feel rather similar to squeezing the muscles of the physical body, so be careful not to accidentally do so. You'll know you're doing it if increased vibrations or noises occur. The third background technique is forced falling asleep. Like straining the brain, this technique can be difficult to conceptualize. However, in the phase it seems natural and obvious. It's a kind of latching on to the phase and consciously directing it to take you where it normally would, to sleep. However, you must at the last minute catch yourself, and instead of actually falling asleep, begin performing secondary techniques. Forced falling asleep can be done in between secondary technique cycles or simultaneously with them. Minimizing external stimulus in the surrounding environment. In order to most effectively practice astral projection, it's crucial to procure or arrange the most distraction-free environment as possible. Anything that could attract the slightest bit of attention or cause one to wake up suddenly could become a potential impediment to a successful experience, whether it be turning a light on, a car driving by outside, or even the touch of one's partner lying next to them in bed. The ideal conditions for astral projections are complete sensory isolation. No lights, no sound, no movement or vibration of any kind, perfect room temperature, etc. Most people don't have the capability of setting up such conditions in their home. One should simply try to come as close as possible. If you know that excessive light or sound will be an issue, the use of comfortable earplugs and/or eye shades is highly recommended. And while it's best to practice projecting while sleeping alone, this too isn't always feasible. If sleeping with a partner, especially if contact with them is typical during your sleep cycle, it's best to let them know of your intention to project and the requirements involved. Your first successful projection. Your first successful astral projection will most likely be rather short, usually in the 30 seconds to 2 minutes range. Nevertheless, it will undoubtedly rouse a profound sense of wonder, awe, and excitement. In fact, it's this very excitement which is usually the cause of the brevity of the initial experience. The practitioner is so flabbergasted by the hyper-real nature of the dream space, and the sense of the possibilities which await them, that the focus necessary for extending the duration of the experience is compromised. There's nothing wrong with this. That human beings are capable of leaving their bodies and entering into a freestanding parallel continuum is an astounding fact worthy of absolute astonishment and reverence. Over time, through practice and repetition, you'll begin to learn how to perfect the solidification of lucidity and extend the duration of your projections. In my personal experience, the upper limit seems to be around 45 minutes, although it seems reasonable to assume that longer projections are possible. Remember, your first projection should center around the basic 3-part plan outlined in the 10-step entry strategy: separation, looking at yourself in the mirror, and accomplishing one other task of your choosing. Once you've done this, subsequent projections will be open to more personalization and will inevitably begin to involve more tasks and more elaborate planning. One thing to remember, though, is that the projector always benefits from having a clear plan of action. Entering the dream space without one almost invariably results in a short-lived experience. Exiting the dream space. While it would perhaps be nice to have complete control over our astral projection experiences, the unfortunate fact is that most projections end unintentionally. In most cases, this ending takes the form of what I call dissipation, in which one's astral senses become increasingly blurred and seem to dissolve, giving way to ordinary waking consciousness. The best you can usually hope for is to have completed your entire plan of action before this happens. Often, especially for less experienced practitioners, a projection will terminate prematurely, prior to the completion of all or any planned items. Radoga calls this a foul. There are certain circumstances in which you might want to force the early termination of the experience, or what I call abort the projection. For instance, if you experience excessive fear, anxiety, or discomfort. Or perhaps you've collected a piece of important information or seen an image you don't want to forget. Making a swift transition back to waking consciousness in order to quickly record the event can be a prudent move, as details from the dream space have a tendency to rapidly fade from memory. You can abort a projection at any time during the experience. It is, in effect, as simple as making the decision to do so. In fact, it's far easier to end a projection than it is to sustain one. The physiological and chemical forces of the human organism are stacked heavily against sustained awareness during dreaming. So much energy and effort goes into both projecting and remaining lucid in the dream space that the experience is poised to give way at the slightest relaxation of the will. Therefore, simply tell yourself you'd like to wake up. In the rare event that this doesn't work immediately, repeatedly shout out to your sleeping body to wake up, like Alice at the end of the Disney cartoon. It can sometimes help to aggressively flail about with your dream body while doing this, as silly as that sounds. Okay, at this point, I've taught you everything you need to know to get started with astral projection. Again, before you try it out, I definitely recommend reading the text version of this video located at levelsobt.com/quick-guide. The text version also includes a section on common mistakes and how to avoid them, which might come in handy if you end up experiencing any difficulties. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've got a couple more videos coming out shortly, including a few interviews with some very interesting people, so definitely subscribe to the channel if you're interested in this kind of thing. Thanks for watching.